Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world. I'm couldn't be more thrilled to be helping facilitate this panel with Amy, Jane, and Jason. It's going to be pretty rapid fire. I think we have about 25, 30 minutes, so we're gonna get straight into it. As we just said, there's I think over the past 10 or 15 years, all of us would agree that customer experience has become a major differentiator within organizations, large and small. And I think the other thing we can probably all agree upon is that having a small team of design or product or engineering people within those organizations responsible for the customer experience alone is probably not going to cut it, right? It requires everybody in an organization to contribute towards the customer experience. And so the question really is, how do we change the culture of some of our organizations to really embrace customer centricity or human centricity, user centricity, whatever word you want to put at the beginning of centricity there. And that's really what we're going to talk about here. So without further ado, let's get into, can culture be changed, right? How do we encourage a culture of experimentation, of setting North Star goals to help organizations to evolve? Let me go first to Jason and get his thoughts on some of the challenges that he's seen with his organizations that he's been in around can culture be changed and what he's seen effective. Jason.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think it's very hard depending on the organization and the structure. I think having worked in a variety of different organizations, from government to small startups to large enterprise organizations, I think you will find that feeling of risk, the appetite for risk. So I think that bleeds into experimentation and how much people want to adopt that sort of mindset. I think it's very hard to change culture from the bottom up, and you need to find allies at a senior leadership level. And I think also it's about how you frame what you're trying to achieve, and it's framing it in a way of we want to learn more about our users, we want to make de-risk things, we want to make these business values better. So I think if you're trying to look for allies and trying to align people to it, you're trying to achieve company objectives, but also you're trying to educate people around the benefits of doing these sort of things, focusing on the user and how it's going to benefit the business.
That's great. You mentioned risk there, Amy. Maybe I'm come to you and talk a little bit about how we encourage our companies to create space to take risks within our organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to take risk in order to grow. It's just a matter of fact. I personally have learned to embrace it and love it over the years. Interestingly, you should talk about the kind of top-down help that's required to change culture. I completely agree. I can see that, particularly in large companies. But what I have found is that if you ask people who are in the squads, in these kind of cross-functional teams, if they want a change and if they want to have the knowledge needed to push for those changes, they will without a doubt answer yes. If they're answering no, then you have to ask why they're in the company type of situation. But people are going to want to know all the information they can in order to make those risks seem, I don't know, more sensible or something that they could advise on. So ask your teams, what knowledge do you think you're missing? What situations do we need to have you having access to in order to drive this cultural change? I don't want to kind of jump the gun a bit, but getting things like customer empathy into teams, you just ask and then facilitate. Once you know what is needed to drive that cultural change, I think you, as the leadership or even the people in the teams, can push the right direction to make those changes.
Yeah, I think encouraging the broader organization and the people in it to get more awareness and have more empathy for the customer, I think is pretty key. Jane, can you share with us maybe some successful techniques that you may have seen or used to really help kind of embed that knowledge and kind of emotional awareness within the company?
Yes, of course. And I think it's actually really interesting because you asked before about like, how do you then give company to give you space to take risk? And I think the answers are not particularly the only answers, but one of the things that I saw is actually to showcase sort of, if you don't do this, if you don't try to understand your customers, if you don't do your research, this is what could potentially happen. And of course, depending on the companies that you're in, you might want it to sort of surface things like, right, you can have a reputational damage or sort of like profit loss or all those kind of things that might make more sense to your particular companies, right? So I think it's all about tying it back again to sort of like their bottom line as well. Basically talking the language that they can understand. Yeah,
that's great. I think when I was at USAA, we called it Y-cording, where, we had days where everybody went and sat with a phone associate and kind of plugged your own headset in and listened. When I was at Vanguard, though, actually the mutual fund investment company in the States, there was a thing called Swiss Army, where everybody was actually expected to serve on the phones and answer questions and take real calls. And it was, in part, terrifying and in part really, really helpful on a regular monthly basis to be able to do that. Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of dive in there. I've seen real success across several companies with that type of stuff. So, for example, there was actually a study done by Marks and Spencer's years ago around seating plans in their shoe departments. And head office would send down these seating plans and be quite strict about which way they should be. And then when a head office operative went to one of the stores, they'd laid it out differently. And they asked why. And it was because the people on the floor knew exactly how people wanted to sit in those seats. So at Clark's, actually, they send people back to the floor every year from head office. You go and work a stint in the shops. I personally had my first job in the Clark shop, so I knew all about that. And at Seckle, what we do, we have kind of empathy sessions with our customers where we invite one of our clients to almost vent, a guided vent on things that are frustrating them or even things that are making them really happy. And in that session, we have our engineers, we have our head of product, we have people from all across the company listening in and helping to kind of guide the questions to get the insights they need. We then just share that out across the company, and it's completely fascinating to hear from real people, not just talking about one small element of a product that you're building as a feature now, but as their whole job and everything that they have to cope with. It's really eye-opening, and I would encourage anyone else to do the same.
I'm curious how you share that out across the company, because I've that communication of kind of research to broad communication I've seen done quite effectively. I've also seen it been like a, hey everybody, here's a 45-page research report that you should read between your meetings, which perhaps isn't the most effective way of doing it. So how have you seen, and anybody else as well, Jane and Jason, how have you seen that be successful at kind of really spreading that out in a more accessible, way?
I'll jump in there. I think it's testing it, trying it. I think there's no one way. I think it's actually certainly it's storytelling. If you want to gain empathy around user stories and users, the people who are using your products and services, you really need to tell stories. I think one of the good things about storytelling is that if you can ignite the senses, taste, smell, feel in your storytelling, then people can relate to that, and they'll take different things, and it becomes memorable that way. And that's really what you want to do through storytelling. You want people to remember. So when people are working on a piece, maybe a tricky problem, there's a reminder as to the stories that have been told. I mean, at Babylon, we've been having sort of voice of the patient, sort of showing, stories from our people using our products. We have decks. We invite pretty much everyone from the company to come to these sessions, playbacks. There's a variety of things. I think it's around that content design as well. People have different schedules, so you need to adapt to that to pace it out. So it isn't a document just hidden in a Google folder somewhere.
Right. Jane.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll go first on this one. So I think what I found sort of really useful as well, when sometimes it does have to be in Google Docs, right? Or any kind of documentations really, is to sort of hit it to the right persons at the right time. And that's because, particularly for very large companies, everybody is working on like very specific pieces, for example. And if you have sort of a very broad research foundationals, they could be like, and then it hit them at not the right time. The effect could be like, well, that's great, but I can't really actually do anything on that. Like, what do you want me to do? So it becomes rather quote unquote useless, for lack of better words, really. But if we can sort of highlight, right, these are sort of like the pieces that you might want to pay attention to because this might be related to your projects or your areas of expertise of interest, it becomes slightly more actionables. Yeah.
Sure. Amy.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, actually. I see that as the design functions. One of our jobs, basically, is making sure we get the insights into the projects at the right time. On a practical note, we also host watch parties for our sessions because watching them or being there live is probably the best way for you to interpret that information. And yes, appreciate the hidden nature of a Confluence document in our case. So yeah, it's really nice to invite people, have some time set aside in their diary specifically to digest those insights. Jason, I can see you've got something to add.
Yeah, I mean, 100% on that, getting people and getting, different people from different levels within the organization. Why not inviting senior leadership? I mean, the best way to understand the customer, and I think, Richard, you've spoken about this, in being involved, getting people on the support phones, listening to calls, all that sort of stuff. It's so rich when you have that first-hand experience. And, again, making sure engineers, product are at these research events too, because, again, that's the way of seeding those stories. When people have seen it firsthand, they can tell that story and then things go on. Oh, yeah, but you remember I saw this, the user was using it like that. Yeah.
I think I totally agree. I think I've been involved in design leadership for about 25 years now, and I've never seen as many kind of aha moments from people from all sorts of backgrounds, whether it's executives, technology, legal, even, as when they're sitting behind that one-way mirror watching, or monitor these days, watching a live usability test or research session go on and actually really observe and go, oh, I get it now. This is how that decision, all these sets of decisions that I make are going to impact real human beings, Jane, did you have...
Yeah, I was just going to sort of emphasize the natures of collaborations when we were doing research and having sort of people outside of just design and research follow it. In my other life, we had projects where we bring the engineers along that built sort of the products to see firsthand how users use it. At that time, we did it because there was difference in opinions between the different departments of that particular projects. And it's only when they are face to face with the customers and they see the customer struggling and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I know what you're talking about. And that was just, and surprisingly, it actually becomes sort of a bond for the team as well. So it's not just sort of bringing the customers to the front of the team. It's actually sort of become a bonding moment for the different department that's previously sort of slightly on edge, for example. Yeah, it's really could be quite powerful, I think.
So let's, I think customer empathy and understanding, kind of walking in the shoes, if you will, of the customers is one thing. I think there's another component which, Amy, I think you touched on earlier, so I'm going to come to you first, which is around education and knowledge of our employees, right? And how we can help them to kind of almost level up, right? To become more of maybe a T-shaped type kind of skill set, to really broaden the top of that T in the terms of design and experience, education and techniques that they can, if not maybe use all the time in their jobs, but at least participate in and leverage. So can you, Amy, talk a little bit about successes you've seen there, and then Jane and Jason will come to you.
Yeah, of course. It's almost like you've seen the topic of my talk, Richard. It's stunning, really. So the reason I was saying that we have people from other areas of the business in these kind of empathy sessions or usability testing or depth interviews, any type of research, is because we've actually been running little mini skills exchange sessions with the people in these other teams. Now, obviously, Seckle is quite a small company, but I've seen this work in larger companies with thousands of employees as well. You simply offer up your skills for exchange and invite anyone in the company to come along. You give them a brief kind of title and synopsis of what they are. So I've run sessions around how to conduct usability testing, how to look at card sorts. And in those sessions, I'm very much sharing the basics of what they are, when you use them. We do a little kind of practical session on how to use them, which is always fun and silly. And then we talk about how you would report on the findings that you get. And so by having that shared knowledge and understanding within your squads, they will seek out that validation that us as the user experience designers or researchers would normally look for ourselves. You will find the engineering team calling up, can we validate that? I think that's an assumption. Or have we run this past some real users before we build it? Because we don't want to have to do another iteration, And it works the other way around. I've picked up a whole bunch of knowledge around our coding and how our setup works, so that I can design things that are going to be, I'm still learning, but going to be much more sympathetic to our build, but still provide great user experience. It's amazing. We're measuring our success with it. We're kind of asking people to fill in questionnaires about how confident they feel in these skills. And I'm reaping the rewards, basically. It's fantastic.
That's great. When you have your engineering partners asking if we can do another usability test, that's a huge signal of success, right? Jason, how have you seen this kind of, been successful at driving education throughout the organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to Amy's point, it's that team sport, isn't it? If a team's functioning really well, everyone owns the design, and then you opened with that. If the product fails, it's because of everyone's efforts. A line of code or bad usability or whatever it might be, product market fit. So everyone should be inquiring and challenging it and going, is this the best? Why are we doing this? And I think from my experience in terms of embedding that knowledge and that user-centered approach, I learned this from some work I did a few years ago, working with elite coaches and sports people. And also this is something that surgeons often talk a lot about, is that see one, do one, teach one. And, you see the thing, you see how to do something, you do it yourself to learn the techniques, and then you teach it to other people. And it's that knowledge transfer within teams, like, engineers coming to usability testing sessions or research sessions, and then understanding the questions that we're asking. And then, I love it when a developer is actually going to me, so why are we doing that? And they're playing back the questions I'd be asking a user when they're doing that stuff, it's great. That for me is a result. Challenging that we make the best products.
That's great. Jane, I know you've got something to add here.
Yeah, so I completely sort of agree with Amy and Jason. I think definitely it's like a team effort. And I think sort of what I see sort of successful as well is also to, how do you call it? Be very strategic in terms of the items that you wanted to use as a sample, for example, or like that first project, that first thing that you start to sort of insert that first bit of educations, and didn't just came across as like, right, these are all the suites of toolkits that we need to use, and we need to use all of them regardless of the timing of our product. I think the sort of strategic and conscious decisions on when to input particular lessons will be very important as well. Because again, we are working together. We're not like better than everybody else in the team, for example. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Jane, that idea of kind of purposefulness and selecting helping people to understand what the right tool for the right job is, rather than kind of like a blind application of every design and usability technique that we teach in all situations. Finding that right tool is key. We're approaching the end of our time here, but there is one more topic I'd like us to touch on just briefly. And Amy, I think you mentioned this when we were talking about the education piece. There's the idea of how do we align the organization upon shared goals and shared systems of measurement so that we can all be rowing in the same direction, trying to achieve the same thing and kind of almost have the assist mentality, right? And what I mean by that is, like, I don't get rewarded for scoring a goal. I get rewarded for, if I may use a football metaphor, I get rewarded for assisting with a goal, right? So how have you all seen that within your organization's successes or failures in terms of aligning on shared goals? Jane, maybe come to you first on that.
So say again, how do you measure it? Sort of.
Yes. How do we align upon shared goals? What are some signs of success that we're being successful at spreading this culture within our organizations?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see sort of interestingly is that when you sort of at the start of a project, for example, you agreed, everybody agreed, like, right, these are sort of like what good looks like for our project, what does success looks like, right? And so when we sort of released it and sort of see like the difference in the metrics or like drop downs or whatever it is that you agreed on upfront, it's become sort of like a celebration for everybody. It's not just like design did this or like, oh, development, you're really great. Thank you very much for your hard work. It's like also mindfully mentioning everybody that had worked on that particular projects as well, and not just sort of like golden child one particular departments. I think that's sort of had worked really quite well so far. But I can see that you have something to add as well.
Yeah, I think at the very start of a project, all the way from like the idea generation, invite everyone to the table. It's about it's that empathy thing. Like, I care about this. I have been involved in the delivery. I've helped work out the solution design. I've been part of the design sprint or design workshops. I'm very, very attached to the idea that great design doesn't just come from the designer. And in fact, I'm probably the worst designer in the room because I've got these other, 5 or more people around me who are helping to generate the really cool ideas. And then you find when it comes to fine-tuning those ideas, they've all been in the room when you've watched that usability test going on, when you've spoken about that idea and how you should build it. So, I mean, one of my squads in particular is just performing so highly because we all understand the problem, the solution, and now we're all able to fine-tune the solution. And it's like quick Slack conversation about, oh, should we filter this way or that way? Discussion done, and then it's implemented, and it's so good to see. Yeah.
I love that. And, you just made me think that we talked a lot about driving empathy for the customer. But you really need to practice empathy in general, right? For ourselves and our other employees and everybody in the organization, not just for the customers. Jason.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was about to say, actually. I talk about this in my presentation. 100%, Jane, it's making sure we're doubled down on measurable outcomes, like what are we actually trying to achieve, but then looking, at that end-to-end service proposition journey, what's happening, and then, getting cross-functional teams together. So it's not just about the product teams, it's also around the operational teams. In our case, in Babylon, it's also around clinical teams who are delivering the service to patients. So making sure you have a good cross-section of people that are involved in the delivery and the building of that service, to understand what demands there are on each of us, and then, how we can pull together, get that alignment. Everyone can then understand what pains and constraints we have, to then build the best experiences for the members, for our users, but also for our internal users as well. So we can deliver stuff.
Two of my past CEOs from large organizations have both said something along the lines of the customer experience can be no greater than the employee experience. And I think that, what you just said there really, really encapsulates that.